Every criminal inquiry relies on a fundamental question. It is not about the subjective memories witnesses believe they saw. It is not about clouded human perception, nor even the behavioral timeline those rigid chronologies attempt to suggest. You and I must ask the only question grounding this case: what behavioral truths does the physical evidence actually expose? Federal profilers are asking that exact psychological question right now aboard a vessel docked in Fort Pierce, Florida. If the psychology of this mystery fascinates you, like and subscribe now. Turn on your notifications to follow our real-time behavioral analysis of this unfolding investigation. After the United States Coast Guard seized the Soulmate on May 9th, fracturing its isolated psychological environment, 2026, a reality independently verified by multiple outlets and sources closely monitoring the behavioral profiling of this investigation, confirming the ship was steering toward American waters when intercepted. Coast Guard Investigative Service agents are already dissecting the vessel, hunting for physical manifestations of human intent. According to sources closely observing this deeply complex psychological scenario unfolding in Fort Pierce, investigators pulled items into hand-sealed brown evidence envelopes documenting every single motion to prevent contaminating the cognitive and physical trail. They set up a processing station right on the dock. By nightfall, crime scene tape completely isolated the Soulmate's lingering psychological footprint. Let us pause and analyze what that perimeter tape truly represents. This is never just some simple routine precautionary measure, nor is it mere overzealousness. When federal agents isolate a space psychologically, branding it a crime scene, they make a profound legal declaration carrying incredibly real behavioral consequences. They establish an absolutely controlled perimeter. Here, behavioral traces are collected and preserved with the extreme cognitive rigor courts demand for total legal admissibility. They are shielding the integrity of human actions from the initial collection moment through every psychological phase of a trial. They are forging the behavioral and legal foundation of this mystery. The Soulmate is officially formally a confirmed crime scene. Multiple independent investigative outlets have validated this crucial behavioral shift. Independent journalism corroborated these psychological stresses from multiple angles. Sources close to the trauma confirmed the Coast Guard's seizure. Additional reports documented its interception while navigating aggressively toward the United States. Prism News noted that securing this vessel transcends the primal anxiety of rescue, plunging into the cold preservation of vital evidence needed to unlock this deeply complex criminal mindset. According to eyewitnesses, this meticulous behavioral autopsy of the ship began the exact day after it docked in Fort Pierce. Before proceeding, we must cognitively anchor one fact: Brian Hooker currently faces no criminal charges. Brian Hooker's legal defense team, operating out of Michigan, publicly requested suspending premature social judgment, urging the benefit of the doubt, and demanding the basic human empathy any individual caught in this trauma would desire. He consistently and flatly denies any criminal behavioral conduct. That foundational presumption of innocence remains entirely intact throughout our psychological analysis today. The ongoing forensic examination in Fort Pierce remains our focal point, and we will dissect each cognitive element precisely. Before examining what profilers seek inside that vessel, we need to clear up a cognitive distortion currently plaguing the mainstream media coverage of this case. Many analysts incorrectly point to the FBI as the primary agency steering this highly complex psychological investigation. That is entirely factually false. The Coast Guard Investigative Service actually commands this case, not the FBI, nor any localized state police body, nor the Bahamian authorities. According to early internal case documentation, these agents are elite federal officers operating directly alongside the Department of Justice. Their mandate covers behavioral transgressions against American laws within strictly isolated maritime environments. Their operational reach extends into highly complex psychological investigations, involving American citizens and United States flagged vessels floating out in international waters or completely foreign jurisdictions. But what the official manual omits is utterly fascinating. These specific investigators are genuine specialists in human maritime psychology. They analyze isolated vessels exactly how traditional detectives profile a domestic home. They know how electrical systems literally record human behavior. They understand how human navigation data gets digitally stored. They know what battery systems passively observe and how to extract it. They know how satellite pings create connection histories, uncovering hidden behavioral memories. They are not projecting terrestrial forensic protocols onto an isolated environment their minds cannot comprehend. They avoid applying rigid land-based protocols to alien environments. Instead, they operate inside the exact psychological habitat they trained for. As forensic scientist Joseph Scott Morgan observed, analyzing this complex cognitive puzzle for specialized media, this specific service wields the entire federal government's backing easily, requesting psychological support from various agencies, including the FBI. He noted they can ship behavioral materials for deep clinical analysis straight to the forensic lab in Quantico, Virginia. The cognitive resources available for this analysis extend far beyond their own immediate agency. According to Kenneth Enjuran, an expert maritime law professor from the University of Houston, American authorities, including the Coast Guard, they possess the authority to make an arrest if the evidence points there. Even if the trauma occurred in Bahamian waters, that vessel flies an American flag. That legal framework grounds the psychological and physical weight of every sealed evidence bag sitting in Fort Pierce today. Yet experts point out a crucial behavioral detail that you and I must address head-on. One expert warned that forensic investigators lack the ideal crime scene as the vessel was seized over a month after she mysteriously vanished. They noted that as time passes, biological material naturally degrades, leaving crucial physical evidence fundamentally compromised. This decay creates severe logistical hurdles for the ongoing criminal investigation. It is a valid professional concern. Biological evidence decays. Time perpetually works against the psychological momentum of any forensic investigation. Over 5 agonizing weeks passed since the night of April 4th. The boat baked beneath the sweltering, relentless Bahamian climate. Other individuals boarded during the voyage, contaminating the space. However, one stark psychological factor drastically shifts this equation. The Soulmate's most crucial evidence is not biological. It does not erase with the heat, nor does its memory deteriorate with the passing weeks. It lives deep within cloud servers, patiently waiting to be decoded by the right minds with the proper legal authority. Let us carefully dissect the psychology behind each category of this critical evidence. Our starting point is a behavioral detail mainstream media entirely overlooked while covering this disturbing true crime case. Until recently, observers following the investigation missed a crucial fact: the Soulmate possesses cameras acting as silent witnesses. According to experts familiar with the vessel's gear and by closely analyzing visual records, a rigid security camera system sits right beneath the bimini. For those unfamiliar with naval terminology, the bimini is simply the structure sheltering the boat's outer cockpit. It is the vital outdoor social space where individuals spend almost all their conscious hours up on deck. That is where you naturally gather at night to drink. It is the immediate arrival point when boarding from the dinghy. It marks the very first space your physical body occupies upon stepping onto your own vessel. A surveillance lens tucked beneath that bimini commands an unblinking direct line of sight right into the cockpit. Toward the cabin stairs, capturing anyone boarding or moving around. This unyielding gaze makes it the most psychologically revealing piece of physical evidence in this entire criminal investigation. Brian Hooker's personal narrative fiercely demands that. The Soulmate remained entirely void of human presence from their departure around 7:30 p.m. until rescuers finally towed it back the morning of April 5th. That is the exact psychological script he fed the Bahamian authorities. It is the constructed version he provided during that recorded call with Blaine Stevenson. A call he never realized was being documented. He repeated this identical narrative publicly to the media following his sudden release in the Bahamas. If his mind is telling the truth, that hidden camera should capture absolutely nothing after their initial departure. No movement, no figures, just a pitch-black cockpit and an abandoned vessel. The footage must reflect this isolation if Brian's memory is genuine. But if Brian and Lynette returned to the Soulmate, if their dinghy drifted back to the anchorage zone, if they stepped aboard and inhabited that space on April 4th, it is highly probable that unblinking lens absorbed every single behavioral move. And here is the detail where you and I see this shift from significant to completely decisive. Modern maritime security networks are explicitly engineered to monitor the surrounding environment the moment the owners abandon the vessel. They sync directly to the cloud automatically and without interruption, meaning even if a panicked mind deleted local files to erase their behavioral tracks, the digital memory might exist remotely, on a server that law enforcement can legally dissect. A silent witness quietly archiving the visual reality of the night Lynette Hooker tragically vanished. The psychological gravity of this digital discovery at Ozochi discovery is absolute. Just consider the mental collapse of Brian's carefully constructed narrative if footage actually revealed two distinct figures boarding the Soulmate past 7:45 p.m. You and I know exactly how a jury would interpret that evidence. It wouldn't merely challenge his story, it would shatter his psychological defense entirely. We still don't know what that unblinking eye observed. Forensic investigators are working to decode that right now in Fort Pierce. The next evidence category harbors the deepest psychological secrets aboard the Soulmate. An intricate behavioral aspect that most mainstream outlets completely fail to articulate to those of us analyzing this case. Modern liveaboard sailing vessels, especially those featuring advanced solar networks like the Soulmate, rely on complex management systems to store and distribute electrical energy throughout the vessel. These aren't just passive batteries, they are highly complex units that meticulously track the behavioral pattern of every single power draw, monitoring its internal state continuously. You and I know modern systems leave exact timestamps. Every behavioral impulse is recorded. When an individual turns on lights out of sheer habit, the system logs the exact moment, the duration and energy spent. If a subject mindlessly runs water to wash their hands like an automaton, it gets logged. Every compulsive pull of the fridge door is documented. When the heater fires up because someone seeks the psychological comfort of a hot shower, the system files it away. Plugging in a device to satisfy that human need for social connection, that behavior is also captured. According to the testimony of Carly Ellsworth, the daughter who shared the Soulmate with her mother in February 2026. Lynette's most deeply ingrained behavioral pattern after sailing was going straight below deck to wash the salt off. It was a compulsion, always without exception. Step aboard, head down, shower, decompress. It was an unbreakable psychological routine. If Lynette returned to the boat on the night of April 4th, and I must stress, this is merely a working hypothesis our forensic team is evaluating. Experts are exploring this angle. It is not an established fact, as Brian remains uncharged and fiercely maintains his narrative of innocence. The system's baseline should reflect the behavioral patterns of two individuals returning to their psychological safe space after hours away. Lights flashing on water pumps, running climate control, activating devices, desperately tethering to power sources. The electrical footprint of domestic life, resuming its baseline routine. That specific behavioral metric turns a clinical suspicion into a conclusive forensic diagnosis. According to the specialist consulted for this forensic case profile, Brian and Lynette replaced the vessel's batteries with an entirely new module just a couple of years ago. These modern management systems feature an exhaustive digital memory. They are no longer the passive black boxes of the past. They are literal profile generators, stamping a time on every drain. Psychologically speaking, they act as unbribable behavioral diaries. Let's look at this together. The behavioral diary reveals two possible scenarios. First hypothesis. The log shows a total absence of human stimuli after 4:15 on April 4th. The exact hour they supposedly departed, leaving only cold background noise, the fridge or pumps running mechanically, purely automatic processes requiring zero cognitive or human intervention. This baseline would support Brian's core narrative, affirming the vessel remained empty and completely dark from late afternoon until dawn. Second hypothesis. The digital memory uncovers a distinct pattern of human behavioral activity well past 8 in the evening. Lights running, water heat devices seeking a charge. The unmistakable psychological wake of subjects inhabiting their sanctuary. This empirical evidence would violently collide with Brian's constructed narrative of that April night. There is no room for cognitive dissonance here. The machine either validates his confession or shatters his reality. A system like this never lies. It feels no emotional stress or pressure. You cannot gaslight its data into being wrong. It just coldly registers the behavioral stimulus and the hour. Investigators already possess this system. They hold that digital brain. And once the psychological autopsy concludes, one of these two behavioral realities will inevitably surface. The third category of electronic evidence recovered aboard the vessel warrants our intense clinical focus. If Brian understands how this technology processes data, this is the trigger that should induce sheer panic. The ship was equipped with a powerful Starlink satellite antenna, a broadband network operated by SpaceX, providing a constant lifeline to the outside world, staving off brutal psychological isolation even in deep waters or remote zones. It was the vital social lifeline allowing the couple to keep emotional attachments intact during their 4-year sailing. The exact same digital channel Lynette compulsively used to project her chosen identity across social platforms. It kept their devices chronically hooked to the external world's dopamine stimuli even while they remained anchored and physically isolated around the islands. According to analysts familiar with the ship's spatial layout, the antenna crowned the mast to maximize its spatial dominance, meaning any personal electronic device crossing its invisible boundary, a simple smartphone or a paired smartwatch, would autonomously link to that network long before its human host ever made physical contact with the hull. This virtual handshake happens at a distance subconsciously and fully recorded. Translating this into real behavioral patterns, if the couple returned in their dinghy that night, their phones, their vital cognitive extensions, would have recognized the network upon sensing physical proximity. Both subjects were carrying their fully active smartphones that very night. This fact is corroborated by social interactions intercepted during this meticulous psychological investigation. Both wore synchronized smartwatches. The very microsecond those devices compulsively hunted for a signal and crossed the invisible perimeter was logged as an indelible temporal footprint. You and I can see the gaping vulnerability in his constructed narrative. This psychological and digital evidence could completely dismantle his entire reality. Because the system never stores its digital memories aboard the actual vessel. Its memory lives on remote servers floating in the massive cloud maintained by SpaceX. These servers track every single digital footstep. It is a flawless behavioral map fully accessible to federal investigators with a Justice Department subpoena. You and I have to remember that according to maritime legal experts we consulted, the United States Coast Guard has full legal authority to make an arrest if behavioral patterns demand it. That jurisdiction extends to subpoenas against any American company operating these cloud services. Starlink is run by SpaceX, an American corporation. A federal subpoena handed to them is fully enforceable in United States courts. Even if a suspect wiped every application for us, onboard Soulmate. Even if the physical devices were completely removed or violently destroyed. Starlink logs exactly which devices connected at what time and for how long. That digital footprint survives untouched inside SpaceX servers, waiting to be pulled, read, and psychologically profiled. If that data proves their device is connected to the Soulmate after 7:30 p.m. on April 4th, Brian's alibi shatters. His psychological defense relies entirely on them being far away. Psychologically speaking, a suspect cannot explain away this digital trail by simply inventing a new narrative. It is a cold server timestamp, the kind of undeniable proof that lacks any innocent explanation. When it directly contradicts what a primary suspect already told federal criminal investigators. Now we face the other dark dimension this criminal investigation must actually resolve. Because profiling the Soulmate evidence might finally answer what truly happened on that boat. But that ignores the psychological torture haunting Darlene Hamlet and Carly Ellsworth every single morning. Where is Lynette? The Sea of Abaco has given back absolutely nothing. What do you and I make of this evidence? Will the camera footage, the battery logs, or the Starlink data crack the suspect's mind? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. According to divers and locals with intimate knowledge of these waters, the Sea of Abaco reaches about 15 feet at its absolute deepest point. The water is crystal clear. Search teams have meticulously scanned the surface, the ocean floor, and the air. Yet in the traumatic weeks since April 4th, nothing belonging to Lynette has surfaced. Not even the aquamarine bath robe she was last seen wearing. Not the bright green dry bag nor a single personal item. Nothing. The behavior of this sea always returns what it takes. Every local expert repeats the exact same profiling fact. If Lynette fell into the water under Brian's stated circumstances, something would have floated up. That has not happened, which logically means if she is not in that water, she rests somewhere else. The parallel criminal investigation to mentally profile where that location might be has relied heavily on dedicated volunteers physically searching the Abaco Islands. Let's examine this together. These targeted search zones create a forensic map of logical possibilities. The first is Tahiti Beach and the Atlantic shore east of Elbow Cay, a location far more psychologically remote and isolated than the western face. Fewer tourists, making it accessible by boat from Aunt Pat's Bay in about 10 minutes at idle speed. Brian and Lynette spent the afternoon of April 4th right there at Tahiti Beach. They knew that coastline. They visited it earlier. Psychologically speaking, a stressed mind in the dark naturally gravitates toward familiar places. The second area is a mangrove thicket on the northern edge of Elbow Cay nearing Hopetown Harbour, just before reaching the main anchorage point. Mangroves present a unique forensic nightmare. Human remains can easily become tangled beneath the waterline. But according to forensic psychology experts consulting on this case, cadaver dogs can actually detect decomposition fluids rising to the surface from 30 feet down. This makes searching mangroves entirely viable, unlike open ocean zones. The third location is Snapper Point Marina, a ruined harbour destroyed by Hurricane Dorian back in 2019. Both Brian and Lynette were familiar with it. They visited it with Carly in February 2026, leaving a digital trail on social media. You can reach it by water from Aunt Pat's Bay. One search volunteer already scoured Snapper Point during a previous search without finding any conclusive evidence. The thick limestone and coral make a deep burial nearly impossible in the Abaco Islands. The fourth area currently drawing the highest intense focus from search volunteers is the western shore of Lubbers Quarters. Lubbers Quarters is a small private cay situated directly between Elbow Cay and Marsh Harbour. Its western shore turns away from Elbow Cay, sitting securely on the leeward side. This means it offered protection from the violent winds howling on the night of April 4th. A suspect could navigate a boat to those dark beaches without fighting the extreme conditions that, according to Brian's own testimony, overwhelmed him on the other side. Today, you and I will examine the western shore of Lubbers Quarters. It is remote, totally isolated. Social media trails and behavioral patterns suggest Brian and Lynette may have previously wandered these specific isolated beaches. Photographic evidence of the Lubbers Quarters terrain reveals a harsh, profoundly hostile, rocky landscape. Surface limestone is everywhere. Locals confirm what a panicked, desperate mind would quickly discover digging deeper than 2 feet here, without striking solid bedrock, is practically impossible. There are sandy zones near the shoreline. Just sandy strips near the water, isolated pockets above the tide line. The volunteer search efforts continue here and will resume in the coming days. We must manage our expectations carefully. I am absolutely not claiming that the physical remains of Lynette Hooker are hidden in these exact geographic spots. No criminal charges have been filed against Brian Hooker yet. We study these zones because they match what someone under extreme psychological pressure could reach from Aunt Pat's Bay during those dark hours after Brian's official story began. Both Brian and Lynette had formed memories in these places. They are isolated enough to bury secrets. Searching them is the only logical step required to process this ongoing trauma. Let's step back and unpack the deep concerns raised by forensic experts together. Those obsessing over this true crime case deserve to understand which behavioral and forensic factors assist investigators and which operate against them. According to forensic scientist Joseph Scott Morgan, the investigative team faces a highly complex scenario. He stressed that over a month has passed. Time degrades biological evidence, slowly erasing the physical memory of the trauma. He noted the justified paranoia regarding who boarded the Soulmate in Marsh Harbour, perhaps the delivery captain or anyone else who might have contaminated the original crime scene. All of that is absolutely true. That harsh reality cannot be minimized. However, one specific factor partially counteracts this limitation: the chemical luminol. Luminol is the chemical compound forensics deploy to uncover hidden blood even when someone obsessively scrubs a scene, or when evidence becomes completely invisible to the naked eye. It reacts with iron and hemoglobin, emitting an ultraviolet glow that forces past violence into the light. Even surfaces that were bleached, scrubbed, or compulsively washed will still expose blood traces under luminol. The passage of time certainly diminishes its effectiveness on certain surfaces. But on fiberglass, the primary material of the Soulmate luminol retains its psychological power to expose truth weeks or months after the initial traumatic event occurred. If someone shed blood there and then frantically cleaned it in a panic, luminol will reveal it. Now consider the digital footprint. Battery logs, Starlink connections, and camera recordings do not suffer from amnesia or degrade like human biology. A simple file timestamp does not forget its past after 5 weeks in the Bahamas. The permanent records sitting on SpaceX servers do not rot under the tropical heat. Cloud recordings do not repress memories. That digital consciousness connected to the Soulmate is either present or it simply is not. From a psychological standpoint, the 6 weeks since April 4th mean absolutely nothing to the evidentiary value of that digital memory. Then we have Lynette's intimate possessions. An aquamarine beach cover-up does not spontaneously decompose over 5 miserable weeks. A royal blue Control-Blick scarf does not just vanish. An Apple Watch resting on its charger does not magically erase itself from reality. If those deeply personal items remain on the boat, those very clothes she was photographed wearing at the Abaco Inn on April 4th, items that, according to Brian's explicit alibi, tragically sank into the dark water right alongside Lynette, investigators will find them. No labs required, no complex psychological or forensic interpretations needed. Their presence on that vessel, when Brian's narrative demands they rest at the bottom of the Abaco Sea, would expose a cognitive dissonance speaking for itself. That agonizing countdown, described by the expert Morgan, is entirely real. But the most crucial evidence in this case might just be totally immune to time. According to media reports, Carly Ellsworth posted a social video on May 11th. Exactly 1 day after the Soulmate docked in Fort Pierce, visibly processing her very first Mother's Day without her. She confessed the harsh emotional reality of internalizing that her mother was no longer just a simple text message away. She recounted how her birthday aligned with that same weekend, creating an emotionally devastating week. Carly Ellsworth's birthday fell squarely on that heavy Mother's Day weekend in 2026. You and I recognize paralyzing grief. She spent her birthday enduring it without her mother, without answers. Based on her own statements, she received 0 case updates during that fragile period. She consciously knew the Soulmate had left the Bahamas. But her mind remained completely unaware of the actual details unfolding around it. The investigation has maintained the absolute silence that federal criminal cases require to prevent behavioral manipulation. That confidentiality is psychologically necessary and legally flawless. Let us process this for a second together. Lynette's loved ones endure this traumatic silence while agents dissect evidence bags on a Florida dock. Reports indicate Brian Hooker's attorney refused to answer questions about the seizure of the Soulmate, or whether Hooker was actively cooperating and if his behavioral patterns remained under police scrutiny. It is a classic legal defense mechanism. Counsel advises silence, actively avoiding specific questions about his current mental state. That is simply the standard operation of our judicial system. But Brian Hooker's emotional void, his silence toward both the press and those who deeply love Lynette, creates secondary trauma for Carly. It adds a crushing psychological weight to this entire disappearance. According to statements gathered by national media, Brian claimed on April 14th that his sole priority was finding his wife regardless of the odds. He insisted he would never leave the Bahamas without her. He stated that only an overwhelming force could halt his desperate search. Hours after making that psychological commitment, he flew home. A brutal cognitive dissonance. Since then, reports suggest he actively avoided emotional contact with Lynette's daughter or mother. He has not sat down with Darlene Hamlet, nor has he called Carly Ellsworth. He has not been the desperate voice begging investigators to bring his wife home. Analytically speaking, this avoidance is not empirical proof of any crime. Brian is not currently charged. His attorneys maintain his absolute innocence, but this severe pattern of avoidance is a documented fact. It is the exact psychological behavior that detectives, juries and the public will rigorously evaluate long after this tragic episode reaches its conclusion. Meanwhile, Carly posts Mother's Day videos online, sitting in complete emotional isolation without any answers. Let us logically examine the current state of the investigation built entirely on verified public reports. The yacht Soulmate sits at the Fort Pierce Station in Florida. It is officially an active crime scene according to local law enforcement sources on the ground. Agents have initiated an exhaustive forensic analysis that will span across multiple highly stressful psychological sessions. Physical evidence has been carefully extracted in completely sealed bags. The analytical study of cameras, battery logs, Starlink connections, navigation data, and biological fluid collection is already underway. According to official channels, the Coast Guard declined offering specific details, actively protecting the fragile integrity of this ongoing investigation. Reports indicate that Brian Hooker's legal representatives have completely refused to comment on the vessel's seizure or their client's current level of cooperation. According to media sources tied to the investigation, agents are aggressively interviewing witnesses right now, combining intense body language analysis with rigorous forensic examination. The small dinghy, that 2-meter vessel serving as the absolute core of Brian's narrative about that April night, remains under Bahamian custody. It should be transferred very soon. It is a fundamental piece of physical evidence that has not yet undergone a complete forensic and behavioral evaluation. The physical condition of its anchors, ropes, and surfaces could provide the hard empirical data to either support or entirely shatter Brian's narrative. The Abaco surveillance videos remain tightly sealed under the strict authority of Bahamian investigators. There is absolutely no public confirmation if detectives have even watched it yet. It should already be in federal hands if it is not. The ground search continues. Tracking along the West Coast remains highly active, deeply driven by the fundamental human need to uncover answers. Extensive physical sweeps across Tahiti Beach, the Hopetown Mangroves, and the Snapper Point Marina have been methodically executed and are still ongoing today. According to her own statements, Carly Ellsworth remains completely isolated, receiving zero updates from the investigators. That isolation will end soon. The Soulmate's forensic analysis will reveal the cold truth. Those clinical results will either validate Brian Hooker's elaborate mental construct regarding that April 4th night or tear it down completely. When that happens, the trajectory of this case will pivot drastically with no psychological turning back. Brian Hooker still has not been charged. His defense lawyers maintain his total innocence. The active investigation is federal and rapidly accelerating. Lynette has been missing for 38 days. The current investigation status can be summarized with absolute clinical precision. Yellow police tape surrounds Fort Pierce. Those crucial evidence bags have been meticulously sealed and logged right there on the Florida dock. The forensic scrutiny of the most revealing puzzle piece in Lynette Hooker's disappearance is underway. It will consume several grueling sessions of psychological and technical work. What the agents are actively deciphering includes a camera network beneath the awning, visual data that might reside not just locally but on remote servers accessible through a federal warrant, footage that could have perfectly captured if anyone secretly boarded the Soulmate. On the night of April 4th, a digital battery system that memorized every single electrical impulse of that vessel, logging exact, undeniable timestamps, creating a rigid forensic diary of human behavior that will confirm if the boat was entirely empty or definitively prove someone's hidden physical presence. A Starlink satellite system whose vast SpaceX data logs. Accessible through federal subpoenas, these digital footprints will expose the psychological identity behind every connected device, and the precise moment of connection, regardless of whatever dark secrets a desperate mind tried to bury. The surfaces of that boat harbor unseen remnants of trauma. Even weeks later, advanced forensics and luminol can decode these behavioral echoes. As forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan has so astutely pointed out. Let's consider this together. They have the entire federal government at their disposal, mobilizing Quantico and the FBI. Every investigative tool the United States government can deploy is currently scrutinizing the complex behavioral puzzle aboard the vessel Soulmate. According to maritime legal experts examining the true jurisdictional scope of this complex case, these agents hold absolute authority to make an arrest if the behavioral evidence demands it, despite this dark pathology unfolding in Bahamian waters. That vessel must transition from Bahamian custody directly to the Coast Guard. Surveillance footage from the Abaco Inn, rich with behavioral clues, must reach federal agents immediately. Searches across Loba's quarters, Tahiti Beach, Snapper Point Marina, and the Hopetown mangroves must persist. Remember, Brian Hooker remains uncharged. His defense claims innocence, a critical presumption we must psychologically maintain. Yet Lynette Hooker has been missing for 38 agonizing days. Her daughter endured her birthday and a brutal first Mother's Day completely devoid of answers. And according to her own words, trapped in profound silence without a single investigative update. She was 55. She consciously authored a life on the ocean, embracing it fully deliberately and pouring her entire psyche into it. She documented the beauty and the struggle, fiercely validating her chosen existence. Her chilling final post stated she wouldn't be going anywhere for a while. Tonight, that sanctuary is a crime scene. You and I must recognize that the nation's top behavioral experts are analyzing her tragic fate right now. Every forensic result, psychological twist, and piece of evidence that emerges into the public sphere will be dissected with absolute clinical rigor. We will study every document, every behavioral trace, and every critical detail this investigation eventually reveals. If anyone holds repressed knowledge about this true crime case, the night of April 4th, or the vessel Azura, the search zones or any behavioral anomaly authorities have established secure channels to absorb that intelligence with complete anonymity. Every fragment of memory, however seemingly insignificant, could be the psychological key to finding Lynette and bringing her grieving family closure. If exploring these behavioral patterns brought you clarity today, leave a like and subscribe for future psychological profiles. Hit that notification bell. The case evolves. I'll see you for our next session.